We were a legion that was built to prevent pain, suffering, and fear. The power is in your hands. But know this, we will always be watching.
Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today's video is going to be something that I haven't really done before. Today, I'm going to be making a video asking some questions to ANCAPs. And for those of you who don't know, that's anarcho-capitalists. In short, they're people who want to get rid of all government and let the free market do its thing. Which, honestly, I think it would be a pretty interesting idea to try, and it would be so fascinating to see how it would play out in a place like America. I think it would be a grand experiment if we could take one of our states and implement this, just so we could settle quite a few disputes and see if there's anything to it. But anyway, I digress. Now, me personally, I am a minimalistic government kind of guy, okay? I think that you need at least a little governing to keep a healthy society running. But I'm always open to ideas and conversations. Now, with all that out of the way, let's just go ahead and jump into my biggest contention. Perhaps this has already been answered somewhere and by someone, but if it has, I've missed it. Nuclear weapons. By far the most powerful and game-changing tool humanity has been able to conjure up thus far. And in my opinion, this seems to be the largest monkey wrench in the idea of having an ANCAP country, and I believe rightfully so. Before I get too far into it, I know this may be an American-centric view on this question, but I live here in the good old US of A, so if you wouldn't mind humoring me, let's continue with the assumption that the USA is where Anarcho-Capitalism has decided to raise its flag. So let's say that your dreams have come true and the American government has suddenly wished out of existence. Poof, no more America. What do we do about nuclear weapons? Firstly, how would you divide up our current nuclear arsenal? Do any groups claiming to be capitalist military have claim? Do they divide them up? Do they go to the highest bidder? And in that case, who gets the money? The primary question here is, who gets to claim ownership over the now vacant military arsenals, including the most powerful weapons on the planet?
Let's say people do get tired of the US government and they decide to replace it with the private sector. Everything the government owns, guns, tanks, will be sold to private citizens, private militaries, and private security. But it'll mostly be bought off by private security and private military. As far as the nuclear bombs, they will all be recycled to create nuclear energy via power plants.
Secondly, let's assume that you have a way to work all of that out. What happens then? You have privately contracted militaries for hire with nuclear weapons. What's stopping them from imposing their rule over Anarcho-Capitalism with their newfound power?
The only form of power they'd be getting is electricity.
I assume that the most logical answer is other private military powers that people will pay to protect them. Now, I personally believe in capitalism, but I think the flaw here would be that other countries could simply come in and buy out these companies or pay them off. What happens when the people you are paying to protect you get a better deal in a lengthy contract to subvert any repercussions to their reputation with the general population? I think you see where I'm going with this, and I think it's a very serious issue. You have to worry about countries outside of Anarcho-Capitalism who want all of those nice resources and that land that you're sitting on. You see, the free market is supposed to balance itself out with incentive. A company does something sketchy, and the public stops funding them due to their declining reputation. But with money flowing in from an outside source, that kind of subverts the balance of the free market. Now, I'm looking at this from the perspective of, if I was another country that wants to take over America, how would I do it? And I think it's very important to put yourself in those shoes. And if America is now Anarcho-Capitalism, well, I'm just going to pay off the military powers that be and promise them all manner of luxuries and benefits to either join me or simply stand aside.
Let me ask you a question. When has Walmart security turned against its customers because their competitor, Fry's, decided to pay them off? Or because some country paid them off? It's never happened. And it never will happen. And to state that that will happen is ridiculous. I'll tell you exactly why private security will never be bought off to attack Anarcho-Capitalism, and why a government could never form in Anarcho-Capitalism. If private security was bought off to fight Anarcho-Capitalism, or a government started to form, that would require violence on their part, and that is against the non-aggression principle. If they attack you, which both groups would, you could legally kill them. This would be putting a giant bullseye on any enemies of Ancapistan. They'd basically be going to war against an entire society of people. And I'm sorry, a private security of 1,000 people can't kill millions of people. They just can't. As soon as just a little bit of government springs its ugly head up, they'd be shot dead in Ancapistan. Why? Because their job requires violence, and violence is something that you're allowed to respond with violence. So I don't want to hear any more of this, oh, what if government forms, or what if private security gets bought off? Because both claims are ridiculous.
You could argue that these companies wouldn't give in to temptation because, they believe in Ancapistan and they wouldn't do that. But I don't think it's entirely unreasonable to place your bets on human greed. So, while we're on the subject of other hostile countries interacting with Ancapistan, you have to realize that a bunch of military companies are going to be a lot less effective in battle against a single unified nation's army. Let's say that all of those mercenaries have hearts of gold and truly do embody Anarcho-Capitalism, unwavering in their convictions to Ancapistan. You still have a bunch of broken up military powers. For the free market to work, you can't have a singularly powerful military in Ancapistan. Otherwise, you have a military superpower, and the dangers of that power becoming corrupt and enforcing its own rule is very real. So like I said, you have a bunch of separate military powers against a single, unified national army. Any strategist worth his salt will tell you that you're at a severe disadvantage here. Even if all the companies are cooperating, they're not going to be as effective as the invading forces. Again, though, I suppose you could make the argument that you could appeal to the generosity of other nations to intervene, which is a fair point. If you assume that the international community will aid you against an invading country, you would stand a far better chance. But let's play devil's advocate. Just for argument's sake, let's say that no country wants to get mixed up in the affair. Nobody just wants to get involved in this war. So where does that leave Ancapistan?
Ancapistan, like America, would be cherished for its freedom. There would be countries that would stick up and defend Ancapistan. So Ancapistan would be just fine. Also, even if no country did stick up for Ancapistan, it would still be fine. Not every country in the world needs a military as strong as the United States of America, the strongest military on the planet. There's 194 countries that don't have the strongest military on the planet, and they do just fine. So I'm tired of hearing this crap where, oh well, you need it to be stronger than America, or else your country is screwed. That is BS. That is simply not true. Ancapistan will have a pretty good defense, and that's all it needs. It doesn't need more than that. They would have private militias, private militaries, private security, and the whole society will be armed to the teeth. The whole society will be the military. Anybody that could fight will fight. Let's say 20% fights. That's 64 million people. That seems a lot better than the 2 million people that are in the United States of America's military. 64 million versus 2 million. Who would you wage your bet on?
Okay, so my other big question, something that I am incredibly curious about. How do you plan on making Ancapistan become a reality? For instance, let's say that your name is Mr. Daps, and you advocate heavily for anarcho-capitalism. It's something that you really believe in. How does Mr. Daps plan on setting in motion the machinations which will lead to the birth of glorious Ancapistan? I mean, the whole purpose of advocating for something is to one day see it implemented, right? So how do you topple the government and replace it with the free market, all without violating the non-aggression principle? Do you do it by trying to get more ANCAPs in position of power? Slowly chopping away at the tree of government, removing one piece of legislation at a time? Or do you take a chainsaw and just follow the whole damn thing at once? And more importantly, how do you prevent the whole country from, not becoming a bad playthrough of Fallout minus the radiation? I am extremely curious about your plans and strategies for implementing your ideas. What path do you plan on taking to making your dreams and ideas happen?
Through education. Simply by changing the minds of the people. If everybody believed like me, starting tomorrow, nobody would go to work for government and government would just vanish. Voluntarily opting out, that's the solution. No violence necessary. I'm not a violent commie. I don't want to violently overthrow the government. I don't want to violently overthrow you and tell you how to live. I want you to come up with that decision on your own. And if we could all agree on Anarcho-Capitalism, all the power to us.
And here's an absolutely fantastic segue into speaking of the day that the government is officially abolished, okay? Without a government presence, what's to stop warring factions from emerging and vying for power yet again? There are going to be people who want to reinstitute their own government, and I have heard ANCAP say that they are more than welcome to create their own governments in their own communities, of course, so long as they're voluntary. But what happens when they gain enough power and influence to take on some of those military companies guarding those towns and cities?
That would be an act of war. Your whole argument against Anarcho-Capitalism seems to be, well, somebody could pick a fight with you, so therefore Anarcho-Capitalism can't exist. Anarcho-Capitalism and its allies are perfectly able to defend themselves. Look what happens around the world when big countries try to topple smaller countries for monetary gain. The whole world basically steps in and sticks up for that smaller country. There will be plenty of countries willing to defend Anarcho-Capitalism. Not as if Anarcho-Capitalism even needs it, because Anarcho-Capitalism would have one of the toughest defenses on the planet. Right now, the toughest military on the world has a military of 2 million. Anarcho-Capitalism would have a defense of 64 million. I don't care how tough that 2 million is. They're screwed. The people of Anarcho-Capitalism could literally, legally own tanks, fighter planes, and fully automatic machine guns. Their defense is good enough. Listen to me, listen to how tough this defense is, but people pretend like this is a weak point in Anarcho-Capitalism. This is not a weak point. This is one of Anarcho-Capitalism's strongest points. To say they will be invaded is literally retarded. Alright guys, if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe. I'll catch you on the next episode.